She bought the ticket, paid every cent. Yet from the moment she crossed the threshold, the atmosphere shifted, cold eyes, invisible walls, and whispered judgments wrapped around her like chains. A black woman alone in a world designed to exclude, where every glance and silence carries the weight of 1,000 unspoken rules. This isn't just a flight, it's a battlefield cloaked in civility, where power and prejudice collide at 38,000 feet. Somewhere between forced displacement and quiet defiance, a storm brews. One that will expose secrets no one wanted revealed and topple an empire built on denial. If you're ready for a story that shatters illusions and demands justice, like, subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from below. Your support fuels the truth. Ashton Rain arrived at the private check-in terminal of Skylure Airlines with a confidence that was not loud but lived in, the kind earned by enduring too much, too often. She wore a navy coat creased at the shoulders, not from carelessness, but from the weight of always having to prepare for friction. She had triple confirmed this reservation. C2A, first class, purchased 6 months in advance with no discounts, no promotions, just a clean payment from her own account, made quietly, with the pride of someone who'd never asked anyone for anything. The terminal was pristine, glass walls, a waterfall feature, white counters manned by staff in steel gray uniforms. One glance at her, though, and the rhythm of check-in changed. Her boarding pass wouldn't print. The clerk, a man with a rehearsed smile and practiced detachment, blinked at the screen before stepping away to speak into a headset. When he returned, his tone was clipped. "There's been a flag on your reservation," he said. "You'll need to wait for a secondary clearance from security." Ashton furrowed her brow. "Why?" He didn't answer. Moments later, 2 uniformed security officers approached. Without a word, they flanked her on either side, not touching, not threatening, but their presence loud in its implication. Behind her, a white family of 4 was quietly ushered around her by a second attendant. The mother threw a cautious glance over her shoulder before hurrying her kids along. "For your own safety," one officer said with the mechanical politeness of someone reciting protocol, "please remain 3 feet from other guests while we verify your identity." Ashton was directed to a roped-off space beside the counter like she was leaking something toxic. Eyes drifted toward her, then away. She didn't speak. She had learned long ago that protest only added fuel. After 13 minutes of waiting, the clerk returned with a new boarding pass. She extended her hand. He didn't hand it to her directly. Instead, he laid it on the counter and slid it forward without eye contact. Her name was still printed. Almost. Airline read. A misspelling, yes, but not a typo. Not with that particular arrangement of letters. Not with that smirk curling on the attendant's lips as he said it out loud while verifying her ticket. The woman in the next line turned slightly and snorted. Ashton didn't pick up the pass immediately. She waited a second longer, hoping for an apology that wouldn't come, then walked toward security, gripping the edge of her duffel bag so tightly her knuckles whitened. At the security gate, she was randomly selected for an additional screening. She didn't flinch when they searched her shoes, patted her down, and swabbed the inside of her collar. She had grown used to being deemed suspicious by systems that never saw her as neutral. After 20 minutes, she was finally cleared. At boarding, she waited until all other first-class passengers were processed before approaching the gate. She handed over the printed pass. The attendant scanned it. The machine beeped, once then stalled. A blinking red light pulsed on the screen. "Huh," the attendant muttered, tapping the tablet again. She glanced at Ashton's ID and frowned. "You're not on our elite registry," she said, half to herself, half to the line forming behind her. "I'll need to revalidate your access. Can you step aside?" Ashton complied. She waited again. More passengers passed her. More curious glances. After 5 minutes, the woman returned and reissued another pass. Same seat, same gate, but a different format, as if printed from a backup system. No one explained why. No one looked her in the eye. She was let through. As she stepped onto the jet bridge, the lead flight attendant offered a well-practiced smile that froze when she checked the boarding pass. "Coach is to the right," she said quickly. "Actually, I'm in 2A," Ashton said, voice low. The attendant paused, scanned the barcode with a tablet, then nodded slowly. "Proceed." The tone implied surprise, not apology. In first class, the cabin glowed in warm taupe and brushed bronze. The seat backs were high, the spaces wide, and the silence thick with comfort bought at 4 figures ahead. She approached 2A. It was visibly off. No seat cushion, just metal and exposed screws. The tray table was taped shut with a red maintenance tag. Before she could react, a nearby attendant approached. "There was an issue with this seat," she said, her voice syrup-sweet. "We'll reassign you." "But this is my seat," Ashton replied softly. The man on her right, a wide-shouldered traveler with stale breath, had long since claimed the shared armrest, and the teenage boy to her left continued tapping his fingers to an invisible rhythm, earbuds dangling uselessly from his shirt, music leaking from the cracked speaker of his phone. Ashton had hoped the worst was behind her, that the indignity of being demoted from first class to row 34 had been the nadir, but the flight itself had become a second act of cruelty, less public perhaps, but far more intimate in its precision. Each time she closed her eyes, her seat twitched unexpectedly. At first, it leaned forward by a single notch, as if the mechanism had reset. Then it jerked sideways with a mechanical click that startled her fully awake. After the third time, she tried to reset it manually, but the button responded sluggishly, only for the seat to snap completely upright minutes later with enough force to jolt her spine. Across the aisle, another passenger casually reclined into a peaceful slouch, undisturbed. Ashton tried again. The seat leaned back slowly, the movement grating, reluctant. She settled her head against the stiff headrest, trying to block out the world, only to feel the subtle vibration under her. It wasn't turbulence, it was localized. The base of her seat buzzed, then stopped, then buzzed again, short pulses, every 30 seconds. It was maddening. She looked up to catch the eyes of the passing flight attendant, a blonde woman with a painted-on smile and a clipboard tucked to her chest. Ashton raised her hand gently. "Excuse me, I think my seat might be malfunctioning." The woman leaned down, glanced at the seat, and tapped a note into her device. "We're aware," she said. "Maintenance has logged the report." Then she stood straight and moved on, offering warm words to the passenger behind Ashton about meal preferences. Ashton sat back, breathing through her nose. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't escalate. But the vibrating resumed a minute later, stronger this time, almost mocking. She shifted uncomfortably. There was no other seat available, and she knew asking to be moved again would only invite more scrutiny. She turned to the in-flight screen, hoping for distraction, but her touchscreen remained frozen on the welcome menu no matter what icon she tapped. The teenager beside her snorted at something in his video and leaned further into her space. A deep sigh escaped her lips, but it barely rose above the hum of the cabin. The drink cart came slowly, clinking and squeaking. When it reached her row, the attendant didn't ask what she wanted. A half-filled plastic cup of lukewarm water was set on her tray, followed by a foil-covered meal box that was clearly different from the ones passed to others around her. She peeled back the foil to find a pale, rubbery roll and a sealed dessert pastry with a folded napkin wedged beneath it. The napkin felt stiff in her fingers. She pulled it open. Something fell into her lap, a crumpled scrap of paper, stained with grease. She smoothed it flat. Written in smudged ink were 5 words, "Nobody wants your smell here." For a moment, everything around her blurred. The air thickened. Her heartbeat slowed, then thudded. She looked around, searching for a face that might be watching, laughing, expecting a reaction. No one met her eyes. The man beside her continued sleeping. The teenager had turned toward the window. A subtle wave of shame curled through her stomach. She opened the dessert pastry, needing a distraction. Her fingers froze. Inside the crusty edge, tucked in like a sick joke, was a used matchstick, charred at one end, its sulfur head barely visible beneath the sugary shell. It wasn't an accident. No airline served a match in food. No mistake could explain this. Her hands trembled slightly, but she folded the napkin back around the note and set it atop the tray as if it were nothing more than garbage. She didn't call the attendant. She didn't protest. She knew how the story would be framed. Emotional passenger, overreacting, exaggerating. She turned her face toward the window, watching nothing. Only her own reflection staring back, dim, tired, contained. The man beside her shifted and muttered in his sleep. The seat vibrated once more beneath her thighs. No one else flinched. Ashton began to understand the nature of this flight. It wasn't just a demotion or a mistake. It was punishment. Or worse, it was entertainment. Every discomfort felt deliberate. Every failure in the system seemed tailored to her presence. She wanted to scream. Outside the plane, only darkness. A wall of nothing stretching across the window. Time meant little now, measured not in minutes, but in how many small humiliations she could endure before one finally cracked her. She shifted in her seat, trying to find an angle where the base no longer vibrated. But every position felt worse than the last. Her neck ached from the constant tension. Her wrists, resting on the edge of the tray, had started to tingle. Even blinking hurt. She needed help, anything, just a small mercy. Something to hold on to. She reached for the call button, pressing it gently. The small LED above her flickered red for a moment. Then, unexpectedly, the cabin speakers buzzed to life with a hollow tone. A disembodied, genderless voice filled the air. Request denied. Passenger flagged for disruptive behavior. A few nearby passengers turned their heads. One snickered. A woman in the row ahead pulled her scarf closer. The light above Ashton's seat turned off automatically, like she'd been muted by the plane itself. The voice sounded automated, but the message had weight, an accusation dressed up in code, a warning hidden in a technical phrase. She hadn't yelled. She hadn't argued. She hadn't disrupted a single thing. Yet somehow she had been labeled as a problem, her dignity redacted by a machine before she could even ask for a blanket. Ashton blinked, stunned. Her thumb hovered over the call button again, but didn't move. There would be no help. She looked around, not expecting kindness, just recognition. But no one met her gaze. The cabin was asleep or pretending to be. It didn't matter. She curled her hands into her lap, nails digging into her palms, and sat there breathing in the dry, cold air, her throat tightening with every shallow inhale. A new announcement broke the silence, this time from a human voice. Ladies and gentlemen, our cabin crew will now distribute sleep kits for your overnight comfort. She watched as attendants moved down the aisle with neatly folded sleepwear, soft, navy blue sets tucked inside sleek black pouches. One by one, passengers received theirs with a smile and a nod. Some were even asked for size preferences. When the attendant reached her row, he handed a pouch to the man beside her and another to the teenager, then paused. For half a second, she believed he had skipped her by accident. She sat up straight, hopeful. "Excuse me," she began. Without speaking, the attendant reached into a side compartment and pulled out a final pouch. It looked identical on the outside. He dropped it onto her tray table with a thud and walked away. She opened it. The sleepwear inside was the same cut, but the smell hit her instantly. Not perfume, not detergent. Industrial disinfectant, strong, biting, the kind used in hospitals to clean blood. Her nose stung as the odor burned into her sinuses. She pinched the shirt between two fingers and held it away, her stomach twisting. There was no way anyone could wear it. She looked up, trying to catch the attendant before he left, but he had already disappeared behind the service curtain. She stood up slightly, trying to wave him down, but another passenger near the aisle gently motioned for her to sit. "They're busy," he said without emotion, then turned away. She collapsed back into her seat. The man next to her had already changed and was now reclining peacefully, eyes closed beneath a clean sleep mask. The teenager wore the pants over his jeans and had propped his legs against the window. No one else seemed bothered by their clothing. No one else seemed poisoned by their experience. She folded the sleepwear carefully, tucking it back into the pouch, then shoved it beneath her seat as far as it would go. The scent lingered on her hands. She wiped them furiously against her jeans. A light above her blinked on again. She looked up, startled. But it wasn't her call light. It was an alert from the in-flight system. A new message displayed across the cabin's central screen in pale blue text. Reminder: some passengers have been identified as undergoing behavioral evaluation for staff training. Thank you for your cooperation. Ashton stared at the screen. It didn't mention names. It didn't need to. Her stomach sank further as the words echoed in her head. Behavioral evaluation. She wasn't a guest here. She wasn't even a passenger anymore. She was a test subject. Or, worse, an example. Her mind raced with questions that had no answers. Was this some cruel social experiment? An internal stress test for staff? Or had she simply been marked, branded by the error in the system? Her image matched with a flag someone never bothered to remove? The intent didn't matter now. The result was clear. She had become invisible. Not unseen, but unwanted, disqualified, cordoned off from normalcy. She didn't reach out for water. She made herself smaller, quieter, hoping invisibility might buy her a pocket of peace. It did not. What she didn't know, what she could never have anticipated, was that during one of those fragile moments when her eyes had closed, her chin had fallen toward her chest and her body had sagged into exhaustion, a flight attendant 2 rows up had subtly angled his personal tablet toward her. With a practiced flick, he activated the front-facing camera and zoomed in. The image captured Ashton's awkward posture, mouth slightly open, arms crossed protectively across her body, and the fatigue written across her face like bruises. There was nothing obscene in the picture, nothing vulgar. But the camera didn't need that. Her vulnerability was the content. Within minutes, the clip was trimmed, stylized, and synced to a jaunty, mocking tune from a viral trend app. The tablet was quietly passed from one crew member to another behind the curtain near the galley. Whispers followed, giggles hidden behind smirks. One of them added a digital sticker on the video. When you try to look bougie but end up budget. The audio caption read, "Sleeping Beauty, Coach Edition." The clip didn't leave the plane, not yet. But within that sealed cabin, she had become the butt of a joke she didn't even know existed. While she sat silently, trying to steady herself against the emotional weight of everything she had already endured, her image had been transformed into group entertainment for people paid to serve her. After nearly an hour of stillness, the pressure in her bladder forced her to move. The aisle seemed longer than before, as though the rows had multiplied. She tried not to look at anyone, but she felt it, the new temperature in the air. People glancing up, people shifting just slightly. The shift didn't feel random. It felt orchestrated, like the echo of a laugh she wasn't meant to hear. She reached the lavatory and found the door locked. Not occupied, locked. The red light above the handle blinked, but no sounds came from inside. She waited. A minute passed. Then 2. She turned to the nearest attendant, a tall man with neatly trimmed hair and a badge clipped high on his chest. "Excuse me, is this restroom in use?" she asked, voice measured. He looked her over, his smile wide and unnatural, like a man performing for someone off stage. "I'm afraid it's temporarily out of order," he said, overly polite. "Try the one near row 20. "That one had a service sign earlier," she replied, eyes narrowing. "I believe it's fixed now," he said, then stepped sideways, blocking the narrow corridor with his body. Ashton stared at him. Behind her, passengers stirred. One woman gave her a pitying glance before quickly looking away. The attendant didn't move. He wasn't threatening, but his presence was absolute. It was clear, this wasn't about a broken door. It wasn't even about a policy. It was a performance. He was placing her in a scene, denying her something basic, something human, in a space where she couldn't argue back without becoming the problem. And the worst part was that everyone knew. Everyone watching understood the script. Their silence was complicity. She turned, ashamed of the flush creeping up her neck, and walked toward the second lavatory. It too remained locked. She returned to her seat 20 minutes later, bladder aching, throat dry, and pride further eroded. Ashton didn't say a word. She couldn't. The injustice was no longer personal. It was systematic. And she was no longer a passenger. She was a prop in a larger performance for people who knew she couldn't leave. From behind the curtain, she heard another muted chuckle, a whisper, then the scent of food being reheated, though she hadn't been offered anything since her tray had been removed. A fresh meal was served to the man beside her: steak, real utensils, a warm roll. The teenager across the aisle snapped a photo of his own plate for social media. No one asked if she was hungry. No one remembered her at all. She noticed the same attendant from the restroom now moving back up the aisle, tablet in hand, pausing every few rows to show something to another staff member. The image of herself, caught unaware in someone's camera and turned into content for cheap laughs, still clung to her skin like a rash. She could feel it in every glance that lingered too long, every whisper that ended in suppressed chuckles. And yet, even after that, she had said nothing. She had swallowed every insult like a pill with no water. But something deeper now began to shift, a crawling discomfort that bloomed beneath the surface. She felt cold, not from the cabin temperature, but from being emotionally exposed for too long. With her original blanket gone and the thin cloth she'd been given earlier failing to hold any warmth, she reached under the seat in front of her, searching for her carry-on to retrieve a sweater. Her fingers met the familiar canvas edge of her duffel bag, but when she pulled it out, she knew something was wrong. The zipper was undone halfway. Her heart sank as she unzipped it fully. Inside, her belongings were no longer in the order she had packed them. Her toiletry kit was unzipped, its contents scattered. A zippered folder containing her documents had been opened and hastily closed, the corner of her passport sticking out. Her charger cord was missing. But what stopped her breath was the photo. A single printed image she kept tucked between her notebooks, of her and her younger brother, both smiling wide outside their childhood home, arms slung around each other. It was torn in half, the rip jagged, careless. His face was gone. Only her half remained, creased and stained at the edge with a dark smudge. Her eyes dropped to the folder where her business papers had been stored. There, across the top page of her corporate ID and credentials, was a crude streak of lipstick, thick, artificial red, smeared diagonally like a slap across her name and photo. She blinked once, twice. Her throat tightened, not with tears, but with something heavier. Rage, disbelief, humiliation coiled so tightly together that it hollowed out her lungs. She looked around. No one saw. No one noticed. She pushed the bag beneath her seat again, slower this time, and sat upright, stiff as stone. Not 5 minutes passed before a flight attendant appeared at her side, expression unreadable, a clipboard and pen in one hand and a folded form in the other. "Ms. Rain," the attendant said flatly, not asking for confirmation. "We understand you've had some discomfort during the flight. We've prepared a service recovery form for your consideration." Ashton stared at the paper being offered to her, her hands unmoving. "Service recovery," she repeated, the words dry in her mouth. The attendant nodded, glancing at the clipboard. "It includes a voucher and official acknowledgement of the situation. Please sign at the bottom and note the reason." Ashton took the form slowly, as though it might burn her fingers. It was printed with the airline's logo at the top, designed to look formal and procedural. Her name was already typed in, her seat number also listed. But under nature of disruption, someone had filled in typed black ink, one chilling line. Passenger displayed racial sensitivity, issues disrupted flight experience. She stared at the words, her pulse thudding in her ears. She reread it once, then again. Racial sensitivity issues. Not was the victim of racism. Not was denied service. Not humiliated publicly. No, she was the problem. Not what happened to her. Not the smears. Not the laughter. Not the matchstick in her food or the chemical-smelling shirt or the locked doors. Just her. She looked up, holding the form delicately, like it might tear under her breath. "I didn't request this," she said, voice even. The attendant's smile remained unchanged. "It's a courtesy, to document the incident and ensure we've met our obligations." Ashton tilted her head. "What incident? The one where my seat was reassigned without notice? Or the one where someone opened my bag and vandalized my things?" There was a pause, brief but loud. The attendant didn't blink. "This is our standard documentation process." Her tone carried the finality of someone reading from a policy manual, with no intention of deviation. Ashton didn't answer. She took the pen and slowly signed, not her real signature, but a version of it she hadn't used since high school, slanted and incomplete. Then she handed the form back, her hands steady even as her heart pounded. The attendant nodded and walked away. In her seat, Ashton leaned back, eyes unfocused, the paper's echo still ringing in her head. She was being rewritten in real time. Her image, her story, her voice, all being curated by others into a version that served their narrative. She wasn't just being erased. She was being reshaped into a cautionary tale for others, a difficult customer, a potential threat, someone whose complaints were rooted not in reality, but in sensitivity. It was gaslighting written in ink, weaponized bureaucracy disguised as customer care. She realized then that there would be no record of what had really happened, not from the crew, not from the airline. If anyone ever asked, the form would be all that remained. And in that version, she had been disruptive. Her body, still chilled from the chemical scent of the unused sleepwear and aching from hours of isolation, felt heavier now, not from fatigue, but from a growing awareness that this flight was no longer a sequence of inconveniences. It was a stage, a performance, and she was the designated spectacle. The cabin lights brightened suddenly, a subtle shift that stirred the drowsy passengers into a collective hum of attention. An announcement followed, delivered in a cheerful tone over the PA system. Ladies and gentlemen, to recognize the exceptional service of our cabin crew, one of our distinguished passengers would like to offer a toast. Ashton turned her head just slightly, seeing a tall white man in business attire rise from seat 1A near the front of the cabin. His voice carried easily over the hush of the cabin. I travel all over the world, but few flights have matched the professionalism and grace of this team. To the Skylar crew, thank you for making this journey a pleasure. Applause erupted across the cabin, polite and enthusiastic, the kind that signaled complicity more than genuine emotion. The man remained standing as a flight attendant approached with a silver tray holding fluted glasses of champagne. He took one and gestured for the attendants to continue passing them out. Ashton watched as the tray made its way row by row, the clink of glassware echoing like a bell toll, marking each seat's worth. The champagne reached her row. The attendant handed a glass to the man beside her, another to the teenager across the aisle. Then, instead of a third glass, she set down a clear plastic cup filled with water onto Ashton's tray table. A small printed label clung to its side, damp from condensation. She stared at it. The label read, "Avoid alcohol high-risk behavior." Her hand froze midair and her chest tightened. She looked up. The attendant was already moving down the aisle. There had been no mistake. This wasn't oversight. It was targeted. She wasn't even trusted with a toast. The message was clear, dangerous, unpredictable, unworthy of celebration. Around her, passengers lifted their glasses in synchronized approval. The white man raised his again for a second cheer. Ashton sat still, the cup untouched, the label burning into her vision. A new weight pressed down on her, not shame, but fury, slow and restrained, coiled around her bones like wire. Minutes later, the in-flight entertainment rebooted, a flicker of light illuminating each seatback screen. The menu reloaded, cheerful and colorful. But Ashton's screen didn't offer options. Instead, it auto-launched into a documentary she had not selected. The title screen blared in bold white letters, Understanding Black Behavioral Disorders, a modern guide to managing aggression. She blinked, her pulse spiking. Her fingers darted to the remote embedded in the armrest. She pressed the home button. Nothing happened. Volume down. Nothing. Power. Nothing. The screen kept playing. A deep, clinical voice began narrating over images of children being scolded in classrooms, of adult black men in correctional facilities, of interviews with professionals discussing anger management and coping mechanisms. Ashton gripped the armrest so tightly her knuckles blanched. She tried again, pushing every button, holding them down, but the interface was frozen. The screen was locked. She glanced at the teenager beside her. His screen displayed a cartoon movie. The man on her other side was watching a nature documentary, smiling faintly as a lioness fed her cubs. Only hers had been hijacked. Only she had been assigned this content. Her mind reeled, trying to make sense of it. It was too specific to be random, too cruel to be accidental. No airline would curate such content. Someone on this crew had either uploaded it or linked it deliberately to her seat. The implication was unmistakable. She was being diagnosed mid-flight, shamed by algorithm, labeled as aggressive not because of her actions, but because of her presence. The documentary played on, each word a slow incision. Often misunderstood, individuals with these traits may appear confrontational, even when unaware of the social consequences of their behavior. Ashton felt the heat crawl up her neck. She reached again for the call button. It blinked red once, then turned off. No response. No attendant appeared. No one noticed. Or worse, no one cared. She looked around for a face, any face that might offer recognition, support, acknowledgement that what she was experiencing was real. But the passengers remained engrossed in their own entertainment, their own champagne, their own peace. The screen showed a graph now, displaying rates of verbal outbursts overlaid with statistics labeled by race. Ashton's stomach turned. Her body began to tremble, not from fear, but from a fury so deep it had begun to feel like grief. They were rewriting her identity in real time, not just through documents or whispers, but through images, data, and manipulated perception. She was being criminalized in the minds of everyone who caught a glimpse of her screen. And she couldn't stop it. Her remote might as well have been a brick. The seat vibrated again, just once, like a cruel reminder that even stillness wasn't safe. The clink of cutlery in the front rows. The soft shuffle of slippers on the carpet. The carefully curated world continued to move without her, like she didn't exist except when needed for ridicule. She wasn't a passenger anymore. She was a fixture, a symbol, a device for amusement. And the plane, this perfect, enclosed ecosystem of hierarchy and performance, wasn't done with her yet. A soft chime rang through the air, followed by another cabin announcement. The flight attendant's voice was bright with artificial excitement. Ladies and gentlemen, to wrap up our extraordinary flight, we're inviting our first-class passengers to participate in a little game, a bit of fun before landing. Applause trickled in, half-hearted and sleepy, mostly from the front. We call it Who Doesn't Belong, the voice continued, as if it were announcing a raffle. Each guest was invited to anonymously vote on which passenger seemed the most out of place. Just a laugh, folks. A cheeky tradition. No hard feelings. Ashton's stomach dropped. The screen at the front of the cabin blinked to life again. A digital animation began. Bouncing avatars, colorful icons, fake confetti. The names of passengers scrolled across the display in stylized font. The words "top vote" flashed red. Her seat number, her name, her face. Ashton Rain. Blown up, framed in cartoon graphics like a mock prize. A few passengers gasped. Others laughed awkwardly. A hand clapped. Someone muttered something inaudible but clearly amused. It didn't matter what was said. It mattered that it was allowed, that it was planned. This wasn't a joke that went too far. It was a ceremony, a final act, a stage-crafted declaration that she was not one of them, not wanted, not worthy. The flight attendant continued speaking, the grin in their voice impossible to miss. Wow, seems unanimous. Miss Rain, you certainly made an impression. Her chest tightened. But she stood, slowly, not dramatically, not angrily, just precisely. She did not look at the screen. She did not look at the passengers or the crew. She kept her gaze straight ahead as she stepped into the aisle. Her legs were stiff, but her posture didn't waver. She walked toward the front of the cabin with the quiet focus of someone moving through a fire and refusing to flinch. Each step carved through the heavy air of mockery. The cabin felt quiet. Not with respect, but with confusion, uncertainty. People weren't sure if this was still part of the show. Some even chuckled nervously, waiting for a punchline. Ashton didn't stop at the curtain that separated first from economy. She parted it with one hand and continued forward. A flight attendant stepped forward, clearly startled. "Ma'am, passengers aren't permitted near the cockpit," she said, voice wobbling between policy and panic. Ashton didn't stop. "I need to speak to the captain." The attendant raised a hand, as if to block her. "Ma'am, I can't allow." Now. One word. Calm. Measured. But spoken with a tone that didn't request. It commanded. Something in it cut through the false authority of the cabin. The attendant hesitated, then turned and tapped the intercom by the cockpit door, whispering something hurried. A click sounded. The door didn't open all the way, just a crack, but a figure stepped out, framed by the narrow light of the control room. The captain. He was older than she expected, mid-60s, with a receding hairline and a clipped, military-tight uniform. He took one look at her, and his entire expression collapsed. Color drained from his face. The confident stiffness of his posture dissolved in a breath. His hands twitched slightly at his sides. He recognized her. He knew exactly who she was. "Miss Rain," he said, voice dry, caught between reverence and dread. The name landed hard. The kind of tone reserved for boardrooms, not cabins. For headlines, not whispered slurs. "I believe we have a problem," she said quietly, her eyes locking with his. His gaze flicked toward the flight attendant behind her. "Step away," he said, without looking back. The attendant vanished. "Miss Rain," he repeated, this time with deliberate care. This wasn't supposed to." She held up one hand. Not as a threat, not as a demand, just as a pause. "I'm not speaking to anyone else on this flight except you." He swallowed hard. "I understand." Behind her, silence. The crew had gone rigid. The game was over, but no one knew the rules anymore. First class had turned mute. Passengers craned their necks, trying to catch a glimpse of the conversation they couldn't hear, but suddenly feared they were a part of. "I'm documenting everything from this moment forward," she said, coolly. From the open cockpit door emerged a group of people whose presence was impossible to ignore. They were dressed impeccably, in tailored suits and dresses, their faces unreadable, their movements precise. No airline logos, no badges, no introductions. Just a silent procession that moved with purpose down the aisle. Passengers turned, whispering quietly among themselves. The atmosphere transformed from light-hearted anticipation to heavy curiosity. Ashton's heart raced, but her expression remained neutral, a mask perfected through years of practice. The group approached her seat. One man, taller than the rest, stepped forward and knelt down in front of her. His actions were deliberate and respectful, a stark contrast to the hostility she'd endured hours earlier. He reached out and carefully removed her shoe, turning it over with reverence. The sole bore a unique emblem, an embossed symbol that only a select few recognized. It was the insignia of a private designer, one reserved exclusively for the elite circle of corporate co-founders and high-ranking executives associated with Rain Holdings. A subtle acknowledgement of status, of power, and of legacy. The man stood and gave a slight nod, as if communicating a message too complex for words. Ashton met his gaze briefly. Her eyes flickered with a mixture of surprise and quiet triumph. The rest of the officials formed a protective semicircle around her, their silence more profound than any announcement. She could feel the weight of their presence, guardians, perhaps, or emissaries of a larger truth. The cabin remained hushed, passengers unsure whether to stare or look away. The plane's wheels touched the runway with a soft thud, the finality of the moment settling over everyone aboard. As the aircraft taxied toward the gate, another subtle shift occurred near the VIP exit. A large, sleek digital screen flickered on, activated by facial recognition software that scanned each disembarking passenger. When it reached Ashton, the screen brightened and displayed a personalized message in elegant script. "Welcome, High Council Human Rights Evaluator Executive Oversight Division." The words glowed softly, visible only to those standing closest, and most notably, only Ashton seemed aware of the message's significance. A quick glance revealed the screen had shifted to other profiles moments later, but this one remained luminous in her mind. It was a quiet revelation, a confirmation that the woman they had treated with such disdain held a place of authority that far exceeded their assumptions. As the doors opened and the passengers began to disembark, a hush seemed to fall over the cabin. Crew members exchanged looks, some tinged with regret, others with disbelief. Ashton rose with grace, gathering her belongings and adjusting her coat. She walked toward the exit, escorted silently by the group of officials, their steps in rhythm, their faces unreadable. The crowd parted as she passed, whispers trailing behind her like a fading echo. Somewhere deep within the company's labyrinthine internal systems, a new order was taking shape. Early on a rainy Tuesday morning, one of the lead flight attendants who had been involved in the mistreatment of Ashton arrived for their shift to discover their employee ID card refused entry at the gate. The scanner, usually a gateway to routine tasks, flashed red and issued a harsh buzz. Confused, the attendant tried again, waving the card slowly, then more forcefully. The device remained unyielding. Reaching for their phone, they checked for messages. A notification popped up with a terse message: access revoked. Employment status terminated. Reason: compliance violation, effective immediately. Shock settled like ice in their veins. Their calls to HR and supervisors went unanswered or were met with vague assurances that the decision was final and confidential. Across the airline, a similar pattern emerged. Other crew members who had participated in the event were swiftly removed from duty. Temporary suspensions morphed into permanent separations without public statements or hearings. The company's Human Resources Department circulated strict orders forbidding discussion of Flight 792 outside of closed-door meetings. Meanwhile, within a secured conference room miles from the runway, the airline's senior executives and legal counsel convened. The large projection screen played back security camera footage from the plane, the entire flight, from boarding to disembarkation. The clips revealed every moment of cruelty: the forced reassignment, the disabling of call buttons, the targeted humiliation, the tampering of personal belongings, and the in-flight mockery. Each scene was annotated with timestamps and internal comments highlighting breaches of protocol and ethical standards. The assembled executives watched silently as the footage rolled. No one laughed. No one defended. The word "failed" flashed in bold across the bottom of the screen, overlaid with the phrase "ethics experiment, non-compliance." What the airline internally called an ethics experiment had backfired spectacularly. The very systems designed to identify and mitigate discrimination had been circumvented or corrupted by the crew involved. Worse, the event had spiraled into a public relations nightmare, fueled by viral videos and social media outrage. Damage control teams scrambled to draft statements and apology letters, but none could undo the footage etched into millions of minds. Ashton's identity had become a catalyst. Her resilience forced the airline's leadership to confront the rot within their ranks. Calls were made to external regulators and advocacy groups. Investigations were launched. The airline was forced to suspend multiple employees and rethink its training programs entirely. Meanwhile, scattered conversations among former crew members whispered about the blacklist, a shadow list of names associated with the Flight 792 incident. They spoke in hushed tones about missing schedules, revoked certifications, and erased records. The company's internal database was purged with ruthless efficiency. Employment histories vanished, replaced with blank entries or generic "terminated for cause" tags. No appeals, no explanations. The once vaunted Skylure Airlines, synonymous with luxury and prestige, was now synonymous with scandal and reckoning. Public trust plummeted. Stock prices wavered. Corporate sponsors distanced themselves. Her suitcase, long missing and thought discarded or destroyed during the flight, was returned to her by a discreet courier. It was pristine, sealed carefully in a protective wrap, free from the vandalism it had suffered before. The subtle scent of lavender replaced the stale air that had once clung to its worn edges. She unzipped it slowly, fingers tracing the contours of the familiar leather. Inside, among the meticulously organized contents, lay the monogrammed napkin, the same one that had been placed beneath her food during the flight as a silent insult. now clean and folded with precision. Holding it, she allowed herself a small moment of reflection. The napkin was a symbol, a relic of the past pain that had been transformed into a testament of endurance. Without a word or a backward glance, she folded the napkin once more and carried it through the bustling terminal toward a metal trash can positioned strategically near the Human Resources Office entrance, a place she knew would be frequented by those responsible for the airline's culture and policies. She paused briefly, the afternoon sunlight casting long shadows across the floor, and dropped the napkin into the bin. It landed with a quiet finality, an unspoken message of refusal and renewal. She didn't linger. Her path was not one of confrontation, but of progress. The news cycle had churned relentlessly, yet Ashton chose silence over spectacle, action over anger. She understood that justice was not always loud. It was often measured in moments like these, small, deliberate acts that signal transformation more than retribution. Shortly after, a single photograph circulated among industry insiders and advocacy networks. It showed Ashton standing resolutely before a gleaming new facility, its architecture modern and open. A banner emblazoned with the words, Airline Foundation Global Crew Retraining Academy, hanging proudly across the entrance. Beneath the title, a simple subtitle read, We don't fire. We rebuild awareness. The foundation was her vision realized, a place dedicated not to punishment, but to education, empathy, and systemic change. It aimed to train airline staff worldwide in recognizing and dismantling bias, in fostering respect, and in building cultures where dignity was non-negotiable. The image circulated without explanation or comment, yet it spoke volumes. It was a quiet declaration that Ashton had moved beyond victimhood to stewardship. She had transformed her suffering into a platform for hope and healing. The Academy's first cohort included former flight attendants, corporate leaders, and human rights advocates, people ready to rewrite the rules of engagement and rewrite histories of exclusion. Meanwhile, the airline continued to rebuild itself under intense scrutiny. New policies were drafted, hiring practices overhauled, and mandatory training programs implemented. But real change came from the Foundation's work, a grassroots movement that reached cabin crews, airport staff, and passengers alike. Ashton's leadership style was marked by calm determination. She spoke rarely, but with clarity, embodying the belief that actions spoke louder than words. Her presence in the industry became synonymous with resilience and reform, a beacon for those who had felt invisible or unheard. She never sought the spotlight. There were no grand speeches or public confrontations. Instead, her legacy grew steadily, rooted in meaningful education and systemic accountability. The story of Flight 792, once a cautionary tale of injustice, evolved into a blueprint for transformation, a testament to the power of one person's unwavering dignity to ignite change. In quiet moments, Ashton reflected on the journey. The pain, the silence, the humiliation, all had forged an unbreakable core within her. The end. If you enjoyed this story, please hit like and subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What did you think of the plot twists and Ashton's journey? Also, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. Your feedback means a lot and helps us create more stories that resonate with you.